Welcome back to Q Score. My next guest is getting ready for the release of the new film, Jimi, All by My Side, that he produced along with Academy Award-winning writer-director John Ridley. The film stars Andre Benjamin of Outkast as an early Jimi Hendrix living in London in the mid-'60s, trying to make it before he broke in America. We'll talk about what it was like making this complex film. So without further ado, Mr. Danny Bramson.
Hi, Johnny.
How are you, my friend?
Great to see you, man.
It's good to catch up on your life, man. It's been way too long. And this, I got to see this film at South by Southwest, and I was incredibly impressed by it. Talk about what it took to make a complex film like this, where you had some challenges.
It being a movie about Hendrix, me being very familiar over the years, having the blessings of the various, handlers of Jimi's estate through the decades. That very first soundtrack, Where the Buffalo Roam, Jerry Maguire, Singles, Almost Famous. I put him on City of Angels. I put Hendrix on City of Angels, which did, 9 million copies. I figured basically, even though I had produced albums where I had placed Hendrix and maybe had, sold close to 15 million albums themselves, I knew that the estate was extremely protective, all but reverential when it came to licensing any of Jimi's material to any themed Jimi film, let alone any kind of a biography. And going in, and upon reading it, knowing that, acknowledging it, when I saw that John's frame of reference and compass points to the story kind of began and end in that first draft in and around London. That was that year, that was that scene, that was that
mid-'60s rock and roll.
Zeitgeist. I had to meet this guy that wrote these characters. And I sat down with John and my two other producers that started this project. Jeff Culotta and Sean McHugh run a company called Darko Productions. I was unfamiliar with them, and I was unfamiliar with John, but yet I had to meet them. Just to quiz and to go through, and I had made so many notes and underlines and page tears throughout John's first draft that we sat down at lunch. And I I said to John, where do we start? Page one, you want to go through it? Because it was after I interviewed him, and the first thing I asked him was, had he ever been on the road before? Had he ever been a musician? Had he ever been in our environment whatsoever? No. He just had this amazing ear and this ability to just the ability.
How did Andre come into the picture to be cast as Hendrix? Was he? Well, how did that process work?
My last words to John were, who did you have in mind that could, who was your dream to play this character? And almost instantaneously, he said Andre Benjamin. And I said, Andre 3000, Andre 3 Stacks? He said, yeah. And ironically, I had basically, I think on that record I had done for Higher Learning, ended up the only rap, the only, hip hop, the only true rap in that film, which everyone expected me to go lean on in that kind of environment, was Outkast. And they were a brand new group out of Atlanta. John was turning me on to the whole Atlanta scene. And I listened to all these tapes and I just gravitated towards Outkast. And John and I got on the phone with Andre, and then 19-year-old Andre Benjamin and Big Boy, and got them on the phone and just told them what we were looking for. And they sent us a couple of things and we immediately latched onto it. So here it was, John's telling me the one guy he had in mind always was Andre. And when I got in the car, I put Andre together with what I had done, and then I immediately thought, okay, my ambition was to strategically and realistically, knowing that regardless of my previous relationships with all of the past heads of the estates. Now that it's become controlled by Jimi Hendrix, who's publicly demonstrated, with her many rejections of major films and filmmakers throughout these last 20 years. I immediately to myself committed that I very much wanted to do. My overall style and musical direction of the picture was therefore to harness the musical environment and energy of London in and around that period. It was such a potent period in music that I thought that I could embrace what I felt was, Jimmy's strengths, the way he interpreted other writers' songs, and the imaginative use of his stylings and his, whether it be his speed, but his overall taste,
right,
and his colorful playing. And so I wanted to capture that period where he was finding his voice, his style, his confidence, and where was that jump where suddenly he could become that front man, that showman as well, and to up his ante in terms of his overall guitar stylings.
Right. Now, did Andre play guitar before the film?
No.
So he had to learn to play for the film.
Yes, and with the event that I thought was one of the greatest stories never told, never bootlegged in a photograph and or a visual. The only thing that exists, of that was a year after the fact. But I told John the story of the Beatles on Apple releasing Sgt. Pepper LP in the stores on a Thursday.
That's a great piece.
And
I want to
released
talk about that.
And here it was, Brian Epstein had the Savile Theatre in London, beautiful, antique vaudevillian, formal theater with proscenium stage and a balcony and terraced boxes. And he would promote like 3-act bills, much like Bill Graham's Fillmore's, every Sunday night. And he'd have 2 shows, like a 7 o'clock show, a 10 o'clock show. And so, I told John that Chaz had gotten Jimmy and the experience, this gig playing at the Monterey Pop Festival in California. And so literally a week in front of that, Jimmy had was booked for the Savile Theatre that Sunday night. And I told him that McCartney and Jane Asher and George Harrison and his wife Patty were in attendance. And Jimmy had the temerity, the balls, the confidence to walk out on stage without any rehearsal other than a dressing room run-through rehearsal and a couple listens of the LP, literally, and walked out on stage with Mitch and Noel and played open with
It's one of my favorite scenes in the movie.
Thank you. And so I had told this story to John, that first meeting, that first lunch. And yeah, Danny, great. But he, felt confident with his ending. And much to his credit, 2.5 years later, a month before we started shooting, John just had was absolutely inspired, called me one early morning from London and said, I've just written 22 pages. And it blew my mind. All that talking, all that jabbering, all of my chatter to him, it got in his head. And he just did a draft that was so clever, so poetic, so beautiful, but culminating with this performance. Because I just told him that I felt that everyone knows what happens when the band walks through Heathrow on their way to Monterey.
Right.
Everyone's seen the wild thing and what Don Pennebaker
the fire
grabbed so beautifully and humping the amps and the gasoline on the guitar, all of that. And so with that, I then had, with him calling me with this epiphany. And it was such a creative spark that I'd yet to see out of him, but was so inspirational to me. And then, of course, it would be a dare to anyone else. Great. Now, I hung up the phone with him and I go, great, now I've got to get Sgt. Pepper. Having had this idea for these years. And called McCartney's office, called Sony ATV, because I knew that not only would I have to get Paul and Ringo's and Olivia Harrison's and Yoko Ono's release, as well as Sony ATV's release, which meant Catherine Jackson, right, and all of the estates and litigators, etc. And lo and behold, it was magical. It was really wonderful, and much to Paul's credit, I got official confirmation within 3 days, 72
Helps to have
hours.
a relationship, right? Long-term relationship.
And so I went into the studio. I cut everything at Capitol, and wanting to put together in isolating the key musical moments in film, I recognized that we needed a trio, a strong trio that could replicate, obviously, the experience, but could also cover Cream and capture a snatch of The Who, so I knew that I needed not only versatile, but really professional, great players. And so Waddy and I sat down and wanted him to play every guitar in the movie. And sat down, and we were going through with bass players. It was immediate. Lee Sklar, the greatest bass player in the game, and then when it came to drummers, I thought I thought two different guys. I originally thought Zach Starkey, because I wanted that frenetic, really aggressive overplaying of Mitch Mitchell. But at the same time, he could also cop, because he can play with the Who so beautifully. I thought that he could also cop Mooney, of course, but he could also cop Ginger Baker. So, and I thought that he'd also have the personality, and I wanted that. But then it was interesting. By the time it got out of my lips, Waddy caught it and said, well, if we were going to do it all in America, what about Kenny Aronoff? And I immediately jumped, because I loved Kenny.
Yeah,
I arm wrestled many times in a studio over why I thought Kenny Aronoff was brilliant. I just thought he was maybe one of the great, great drummers, and one of the great American drummers, and why I always loved those great Mellencamp and John Cougar singles. And so with that, our trio was formed. Mm-hmm. And I did it much like I call it in method recording. We got I wanted the finest engineer and the best analog, purest engineer, to be able to get the size and dimensions of each room that Jimmy performed in the various chapters of our film. So, there was only one guy that Waddy and I would have ever had, arms saddle up with us, and that was Nico Bolas, legendary engineer and producer with Neil Young and Keith Richards, etc. And someone that I've been a fan of, since I had my label. And so that was the core of our team. And we set up at Capitol, recorded everything there, and we got full Marshall stacks, old amps, not new pristine ones, the funkiest, oldest vintage ones possible. And I did everything but change their clothes in each environment. So I asked Kenny to bring a double kit to replicate Baker for our Cream onstage jamming moment. And then, a different kit for, we basically went with different instrumentation, mics, amplifiers, and gear for each scene that we had, to create. And it was really, really wonderful. It was one of the most wonderful recording experiences I've ever had. And, but we We also, in addition to the film music you've seen in the film, I wanted to, you know, since that very first draft of John's, he had ended it with Wild Thing. And so I wanted to kind of give him a treat. And we recorded Wild Thing in full, you know, 7.5-minute mastery. And with every guitar distortion and sonic feedback imaginable.
With Andre singing it? Or just without?
We cut everything instrumentally. And then with what I did was we brought Andre in to cut. We recorded in Jimmy's first night in London, before he even settled into a place to sleep. Chad has brought him over to a friend's and a local musician's house, and they had all jammed on acoustic, and they were playing, you know, we had them play Lieber and Stoller's Hound Dog, and, you know, Jimi Hendrix playing Hound Dog, just people sitting around stoned in a room. And so we recorded that in a circle. I think, and I had Andre actually cut the vocal with us in the circle. We did live recording. And then brought in Andre to do the vocal Wild Thing. We also played around at the time with just a brief fragment of Hey Joe, and so we thought, which we didn't end up using, but we ended up, we cut that for fun. But principally it was that, and then with Sgt. Pepper, because of the, you know, imagine, I had to cut everything so far in front that I had to feed Andre the material so that he could try to learn it. Not only, he was a right-handed player and a good one with the guitar, but imagine to turn those hands around. You know, when John and I flew down to Atlanta to kind of nail down Andre, get his full commitment, we talked like, Danny, he said to me, how the hell am I going to learn how to do that? He goes, are we going to reverse the camera? Are we going to do some digital effect? What will we do? And I said, I don't know, but I promise you. And I made him this promise and dare that I don't know if it's ever been done, let alone properly, but if in the end, you know, somehow, you know, every frame of that movie, you don't look good and proficient, I swear, man, I'll put on a dress and heels and walk Sunset Strip. And with that, we laughed. We broke up the dinner. We flew back to LA. And, you know, with that curse I put upon myself, I thought to myself, I needed to find a really patient, comforting guy and player that I could feed. What I did after we recorded everything was that John and I would sit down and take 20 seconds here, a bridge here, a guitar intro here, a brief solo here, and I'd only give Andre and my guitar tech teacher, the guy named Andrew Rollins, wonderful songwriter who's now having a lot of success on getting his songs on the Nashville television show, and with an old friend, and sat in his little home studio, 6 hours a day, 7 days a week, and these 20 seconds here, bridge here, verse here, that we would feed him minimum 2 months in advance. Andre would sit with playing left, with Andrew playing right, and he would mimic his fingers. And we literally started with those rudiments.
So that's how it happened.
So it was rudiments, as all of you know, learning instruments. You literally sit there from day one, A, B, C, D, and go through it. And so it was literally that was the program we crafted. And Andre bought all the way in. And he blew my mind. He was as obsessive as I. And but the one track that we didn't cut in Los Angeles, cut the instrumental of Sgt. Pepper here, because I had John in Dublin where we shot the movie. I had John in Dublin there 2 weeks before and I had to stick around and finish the recording, and principally this one, Sgt. Pepper, and had to do it just right because he had just learned it. So it couldn't be great. It couldn't just be stunning and masterful. His vocal had to all but be, you know, where you know the chorus, you're kind of fumbling, like when you drive with your dad in a car and he'd like sing half the verse. And so we just had to get it right. And so I ended up cutting the instrumental in Los Angeles, and then I cut the vocal. I cut the vocal at Windmill at Bono's and Edge's studio in Dublin, and cut Andre's vocal there late at night.
Nice.
And to capture that mood and the environment. But Andre was just a stunning, you know, teacher, and I didn't have to be that daily taskmaster. Andrew Rollins was just, you know, came through for me and us so beautifully.
Well,
and
he did a great job.
We flew him over to Dublin, and I had him every day of pre-production and principal photography over in London. Had a room off-set where an Andre would just be so methodical to just nail it. And there would be days, maybe only one, where he sat there with me. He goes, Danny, I just don't know this, you know, I'm worried about this. And I look great, and I go, you'd be great.
You've got to work at it.
John and I declared early on, we weren't going to crop. We weren't going to do the movie game and crop it on his face.
He had to look like he was
We
playing.
weren't going to go back from the last row where everything was in a, you know, in a gaze and a gauzy kind of veneer. We didn't want to you know, go for a hand job, the finger, you know, finger close up.
That's good.
And so wanting to capture the organic nature of the film and the style of the film, wanted to capture Andre as Jimmy.
I thought he did a great job. We're actually out of time, but so the film is coming out September
26th here in America, and then we'll probably in about 15 theaters, and then we'll start growing from there. We're going to come out in Europe week in front, and ran around Europe this summer showing it at festivals and got just tremendous reaction. Thankfully, so far, our critical response has been just superb. And John Ridley, I told you when we
Academy Award for 12 Years a Slave.
Here it is, you know, last March he won the Academy Award for 12 Years a Slave. And our sound designer, we had a very, very sophisticated sound design. We drop out all audio completely, drop out, go to visual black at times. It's a very, very, you know, inspired production, and not your conventional film, but something I'm so damn proud of.
I love
I really
the film.
think it's.
So we're going to close with the trailer. So take a look at this, and Danny Bramson, thank you so much for your time, man. Great catching up again. Check it out, Jimmy.
We have a guest who's going to sit in with us. Who brought himself all the way over from America. What's the name again, mate?
Jimi Hendrix. The gig doesn't pay that much. I mean, we're broke, you know, but we're cool. Might as well hang out with us and be broke. And cool.
It's J-I-M-I.
Yeah, I like it that way.
Well, it's my pleasure to come up with the idea. Your success will be thanks enough.
You can't leave it to other people to sort out your life.
You'll never be nothing to them but a curiosity.
Oh, that's cold, man. You really want to change things? When the power of love takes over the love of power, that's when things will change.
You know, the minute things take off for you, I wonder if you're going to notice that I'm not around anymore.
Things you love, they stay with you, if you want them to or not.
Watch out for your ears!
I want my music to go inside the soul of a person. For me, it's colors. I want people to feel the music the same way I see it.
There's so much competition right now. Queen, The Who. Do you think you're better than all of them?
For more Q-Score, please check us out at emPOWERme.tv to find out what goes on behind the curtain and how the film and TV music gets made. It happens right here. Tune in.